Right with Michael Schumacher now, and Senna! My goodness, I just saw him plunge off to the
These were men who drove at 200 miles per hour. They walked away from fires, from crashes that compressed carbon fiber into scrap. They had made peace with danger in ways most people cannot imagine. They were not easily frightened. Alain Prost, Nigel Mansell, Niki Lauda, Gerhard Berger. Between them, 6 world championships, decades of racing at the highest level. Every one of them has said in their own way that Ayrton Senna was unlike anything else they encountered in the sport. Not simply faster, something categorically different. This is what they meant. Before Senna reached Formula One, those who raced against him in the junior categories were already taking note. Eddie Jordan, whose Formula 3 team competed directly against Senna, recalled the wet conditions as the first clear signal. The other drivers adapted to the rain, managed it as a variable. Senna treated it as an advantage. Martin Brundle raced Senna throughout the entire 1983 British Formula 3 season, widely regarded as one of the most competitive junior championships on record. Brundle was not a passive competitor. He went on to a full Formula 1 career and spent years at the front of professional motorsport. His assessment of that F3 season was direct. By mid-year, he understood he was not simply racing a faster driver. He was racing someone who had decided in advance that losing was not an acceptable result, not a preference he was trying to avoid, a decision, fixed and immovable, before the lights went out. In 1984, Senna's 6th Formula One race, he was driving for Toleman, a midfield team with no realistic claim to the front of the grid. The Monaco Grand Prix was run in heavy rain. Senna was closing on Alain Prost, the race leader, in the faster McLaren. The gap was falling at a rate that drew silence from the pit walls. The race was red flagged before Senna could complete the pass. He never got the result. What remained was the observation. Every driver who watched that afternoon understood that something had entered the sport that they had not seen before. As Senna's teammate at McLaren in 1988 and 1989, Alain Prost had access that no rival could match. He could study Senna's telemetry, his braking points, his throttle inputs, his corner-by-corner data, in identical machinery under the same conditions race after race. He used that access thoroughly. Prost has spoken about Senna's qualifying lap at the 1988 San Marino Grand Prix, which was 1.4 seconds faster than anyone else on the grid, including Prost in the same car. He examined the data. He reviewed the sector times and input traces. By his own account, he could not reconcile the numbers with what he understood to be possible. His conclusion was that Senna had reached a state that the telemetry could record but not explain, a level of focus and commitment that Prost said he had never accessed himself. Senna addressed this directly in interviews. He described a qualifying lap at Monaco in which his concentration deepened to a point where he could no longer consciously account for what he was doing. He said the pace kept building, the margins kept narrowing, and at some point, he recognized that he had moved beyond a threshold he could justify. He reduced speed and returned to the pits. He said it frightened him. Niki Lauda returned to Formula One competition 6 weeks after sustaining severe burns in a crash at the 1976 German Grand Prix, injuries that required reconstructive surgery and left permanent scarring. His assessment of risk was not that of a man who shied from it. Lauda described Senna's relationship with danger as distinct from every other driver he had observed. Not reckless, he said, not indifferent to consequences. Rather, a man whose personal threshold for acceptable risk sat at a point that other drivers simply would not approach. Nigel Mansell, the 1992 world champion, spoke about what it was like to find Senna's car in his mirrors during a race. A gap that had felt stable would begin to close, and before the cars were anywhere near each other, the dynamic of the race had already shifted. At the 1987 British Grand Prix, Senna overtook Mansell at Stowe Corner under braking, a place where overtaking was not standard practice, at speeds that left no room for error. Mansell described it as the most audacious move ever executed on him. He had not anticipated it. By the time it registered, it was already done. The drivers Senna raced against were not ordinary competitors. They had spent their lives being the fastest person in any category they entered. They had eliminated every rival in front of them to reach Formula One. They were not easily unsettled. Gerhard Berger was Senna's teammate at McLaren and remained one of his closest friends. He has spoken about Senna's presence in technical meetings, The speed at which he processed information, the precision with which he identified what was relevant, shut the gap between his preparation and everyone else in the room. On track, Berger described Senna's defensive driving as operating at the precise boundary of what the rules permitted, held there consistently enough that no other driver was willing to test it. The reason was simple. Senna had demonstrated on repeated occasions that he would not yield. In wheel-to-wheel racing, close-quarter situations resolve because one driver believes the other might give ground. Senna did not give any driver reason to hold that belief. Riccardo Patrese, Michele Alboreto, Jean Alesi, all experienced combative racers, spoke to the same experience. In a direct confrontation with Senna, the conclusion felt predetermined. He did not force a move. He made the other driver's decision feel like their own. The drivers of the current generation, among them those regarded as the fastest of their era, refer to Senna in terms that are notably different from how competitors usually discuss rivals. He is not framed as a benchmark they are trying to surpass. He occupies a different category of reference entirely. In 1989, at Suzuka, the Japanese Grand Prix was effectively the championship decider. Senna led Prost into the chicane. Prost closed the door. The cars made contact. Prost retired. Senna rejoined, finished first, and was subsequently disqualified on the grounds of a technical infringement, one that had not previously been applied in comparable circumstances. Prost was awarded the championship. Senna's public response was measured and specific. He presented a detailed case to the international press that the governing body's decision had been improper, and he named individuals by name. He did not express anger in abstract terms. He made an argument with evidence and delivered it with precision. The following year, 1990, the same two drivers met again at Suzuka with the championship once more in the balance. On the first lap, at the first corner, Senna drove into Prost. Both cars were eliminated. Senna took the title. Senna has since acknowledged in his own words that the decision was made before the race began. He had determined, before the start, that if Prost took the inside line at the first corner, the race would end there. The moral debate around that decision remains unresolved, and it is not the purpose of this account to settle it. What the incident illustrates is something separate from the ethics involved. Senna formed a precise, conditional decision about what he would do at racing speed, at the opening moment of a Grand Prix, with a championship at stake, and he carried it out without deviation. That capacity to make an irreversible judgment under those conditions and execute it exactly is what separated Senna from every other driver of his generation. His lap times were extraordinary. His pole positions were historic. But what his competitors found genuinely difficult to contend with was his will. Racing against him meant racing against a fixed outcome. No one, across 10 years in Formula One, found a way through it. 65 pole positions, 41 race victories, 3 world championships. The statistics are significant. They are not, by themselves, what defines his reputation among those who raced against him. Damon Hill drove alongside Senna at Williams in 1994, Senna's final season. Hill has described a quality that does not appear in race results, a sense shared across the grid that when Senna was competitive, the rest of the field was not racing for the win. They were racing for second. The outcome felt settled before it was decided. That weight, felt by every driver on the grid, sustained across a decade of competition, is not something that appears in a statistics table. It was built through consistency, through the accumulated evidence of what Senna did in the car, corner after corner and season after season. The drivers who competed against him do not speak about him in the terms usually applied to rivals. There is no competitive qualification. No measured praise calibrated against self-interest. They describe him in terms closer to those used for events or conditions than for individuals. Something that arrived, imposed itself on the sport, and could not be managed or negotiated with. On May 1, 1994, at the San Marino Grand Prix, at the Tamburello corner, Senna's car left the track at approximately 190 miles per hour. He was 34 years old. In Brazil, schools closed. The streets of São Paulo were empty. The country mourned in the manner of a state loss. In the paddock, drivers who had spent years in direct competition with him were openly grief-stricken. What the sport lost was not only its fastest driver, It lost the most direct available evidence that the accepted limits of human performance in a racing car were not, in fact, affixed, that someone operating with sufficient clarity and commitment could find ground that everyone else had agreed did not exist. No driver since has produced the same effect on the competitors around him. His competitors were, by their own accounts, unsettled by him in ways they were not unsettled by anyone else. Many of them have also said, with varying degrees of directness, that they were fortunate to have raced in the same era. Ayrton Senna demonstrated what is possible when a person refuses to accept any internal ceiling on their performance. The drivers who shared a grid with him understood that, even when they found it difficult to live with. It is why they still talk about him the way they do, 30 years later, not as a rival they once outpaced or outwitted, but as something that arrived in the sport and permanently changed the frame of reference. If you found value in this, subscribe. We cover the defining stories of motorsport every week. Leave a comment. Which driver in the current field do you think comes closest to that standard?